On this Sunday night, Canada's Prime Minister in Ukraine. Justin Trudeau's surprise visit to Kyiv, touring the destruction and reopening the Canadian embassy.
The Canadian flag once again will be flying over the streets of Kyiv.
The battle for abortion rights.
We're not just going to lay down and let the Supreme Court take away our rights.
Protesters in the U.S. take their fight straight to the doorstep of Supreme Court justices. Vaccine nasal spray. We sniff out a possible new weapon against COVID-19. Plus, ahead by a century, the growing number of Canadian centenarians who say 100 is the new 90.
Well, as I got to be 50, 60, 70, 80.
And you kept on going?
I kept on going, nearing 100, yes.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us on a day the Canadian Prime Minister made a surprise visit to the Ukrainian capital. Justin Trudeau arrived in Kyiv, flanked by the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Affairs Minister. They toured the destruction in the nearby suburb of Irpin, reopened the Canadian embassy, which was closed in early February amid fears of a Russian invasion, and then Trudeau held a joint press conference with the Ukrainian president.
When I was in Irpin this morning, I saw just how much Ukrainians can do standing against a force 8 times as large as they were. It is an inspiration, but I also saw the work that we're going to have to do all together to rebuild those communities, to rebuild an even stronger future for Ukraine, and that's exactly what we would be there for.
And to that end, the Prime Minister also announced new supports for Ukraine and more sanctions against Russia. Our Europe Bureau Chief, Goomansingh, has the latest from Kyiv.
Jeff, the day of this visit is significant, May 8th, when Europeans mark Allied nations defeating Nazi Germany. It's a sign of unity and support with Ukraine as it battles for its freedom in Europe's largest land war since 1945. A show of confidence in Ukraine's capital as the Canadian embassy gets ready to reopen. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, along with his second-in-command, Chrystia Freeland, and Foreign Affairs Minister Mélanie Joly did the honors of raising the flag, nearly 3 months after the embassy shut down.
Listen, thank you for staying.
The moment was overwhelming for Serhiy Mayer, who worked security at the embassy for the last 5 years and remained on duty every day. A similar sense of duty has been motivating Ukrainians to defend their country with a fierceness that has taken many off guard. While touring around Irpin, just outside of the capital, Trudeau commented on the resilience of Ukrainians. The visit was under heavy guard and kept secret.
Specifically, what did you see that you haven't seen over the last 70-odd days that stuck with you?
I saw just how much Ukrainians can do standing against a force 8 times as large as they were in defending their homes, defending their land, of pushing back against the Russian illegal invasion.
Trudeau came with more than just supportive words, announcing the removal of tariffs on all Ukrainian imports for 1 year, $25 million for food security, money for demining programs, plus more drone cameras, satellite imaging, small arms, and munitions, plus more sanctions on Russia.
Canada will support Ukraine as you seek justice for your people who Russia is killing and brutalizing.
With his country still engaged in a bloody and horrific war, Ukraine's president says he still needs specific defensive weapons to ensure his country's freedom, but says like Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, Canada has answered his calls, and he counts the country among a small group.
We cannot ask from them anymore. So today we are hosting the leader of the fourth country that we also cannot ask for more.
Ukraine's president says he will be putting pressure on other nations for more help and hopes Canada will act as a partner, encouraging others to step up. Jeff?
Crystal Goomansingh reporting in Kyiv tonight. Thanks, Crystal. And some American diplomats also made a temporary return to Kyiv today, 1 month after the U.S. Secretary of State promised their embassy in the Ukrainian capital would reopen soon. This trip is being billed as a diplomatic engagement and not an official resumption of operations at the American embassy. Officials say they hope to fully reopen in the coming weeks. Separately, First Lady Jill Biden made her own surprise visit. She crossed from Slovakia into southwestern Ukraine for a meeting with Ukraine's First Lady, Olena Zelenskyi. That high-level diplomacy in Kyiv came as fighting continued in the east of the country. More than 60 people are feared dead after an airstrike hit a school where people were taking shelter. And the Ukrainian president warned to expect more attacks in the coming hours as Russia prepares to mark a major military anniversary. Abigail Bimman reports.
My son died in my hands. Life has no meaning to me now, says this woman. As mothers around the world celebrate Mother's Day, many in Ukraine are thinking of children lost. Her hope for other mothers is to see their children survive. Some will. More than 300 civilians have now been rescued from the Azovstal steel plant in Mariupol, the city key to Moscow's efforts to create a land bridge between the Crimean Peninsula and parts of the eastern Donbass region controlled by Russian-backed separatists. Azov regiment leaders say the steel mill was still under intensive shelling Saturday, and there are hundreds of troops still inside, many of them wounded, needing help. While in Luhansk, the death toll at this school bombed by Russia Saturday has climbed to as high as 60. 90 were sheltering inside.
It is about staying in power. And Vladimir Putin knows that in the history of Russia, when governments lost a war, they usually lost power.
A very different scene in Russia.
I think that Vladimir Putin seems to be hung up on May 9th, and I'm not quite sure why he's been so foolish, to be blunt.
Rehearsals are underway for Putin's Victory Day celebrations on Monday, a holiday commemorating the Soviet Union's defeat of Nazi Germany in the Second World War, with speculation he could use the opportunity to either ramp up fighting or declare victory over Ukraine.
I think there's slightly too much optimism in Western capitals that the momentum is going to stay on Ukraine's side.
Sunday, G7 leaders held a call with Ukraine's president. As a group, they're promising to further isolate Russia economically, as well as either ban or phase out Russian oil. A lot more difficult for European nations than North American, but they're promising to do so in a, quote, timely fashion. Jeff?
Abigail Bimman in Ottawa. Thanks, Abigail. The United States could be on the verge of a seismic shift over how much say a woman has over her own body. Democrats are attempting to enshrine abortion access into law after last week's leak of a Supreme Court draft opinion that seeks to overturn the landmark Roe v. Wade ruling. Republican states are also gearing up for a fight, and as Reggie Cecchini explains, any decision that restricts abortion rights could find itself on the opposite side of popular opinion.
Fearful that a woman's decision over her own body may be stripped away, a collective voice flooded into the streets of the U.S. over the weekend to pressure lawmakers and courts to back off.
We're not just going to lay down and let the Supreme Court take away our rights.
In Washington, D.C., the protests appeared at the front doors of two conservative Supreme Court justices who appear to back the right-leaning majority in overturning Roe v. Wade, sending shockwaves down the spines of the medical community.
Part of what's so problematic about these laws is that they violate our obligation and our ethics.
That is now putting lawmakers on the spot.
We are going to say not on our watch. They can't duck it anymore.
8 months after the House passed a bill on abortion rights, Senate Democrats will bring a vote on similar legislation this week. And while the numbers aren't on their side, momentum could be.
If we are not successful, then we go to the ballot box.
The majority of Americans support unfettered access to an abortion. but with the public split over where the line should be drawn in terms of maximum times to obtain the procedure, the GOP will be left to navigate the data and not erode anti-abortion support ahead of the midterms.
We want to increase the services for maternal health, to increase the services for adoption services.
Arkansas's Republican governor says exemptions in cases of rape and incest need to be a part of the debate, but that's not something all states intend to do. Politics aside, doctors' main concern is for the well-being of those whose decisions might be made for them.
We're going to keep trying to get our patients connected with the care that they need.
While a court decision is still weeks away, the battle over values only digs deeper. Reggie Cecchini, Global News, Washington.
Iqaluit has just completed an investigation into its worst water contamination crisis. Last fall, fuel leaked into the water supply, leaving it undrinkable for 2 months. Then in January, the water became contaminated again from a different source. Heather Yerkes-West reports on the cause and concerns about clean drinking water in Canada's northernmost city.
With the smell of fuel coming off their drinking water last fall, Iqaluit residents were left scrambling to find any safe supply.
I think it is the biggest crisis that the city has ever faced.
The contamination came from an old fuel tank buried underground near the city's water treatment plant. The contamination meant every business and resident had to rely on bottled water for weeks.
The fact that this happened here in Iqaluit, in a major city in Canada in 2021, is very disturbing.
The city worked quickly to solve the problem, but just a few weeks later, the water was contaminated again.
About a month later, we had another contamination event, which was surprising to us as, we felt confident about the remediation efforts that had happened.
Now, an investigation has revealed what went wrong, finding that the two events were unrelated. The source the second time, a water sealant product improperly installed, seeped into the drinking supply. But the back-to-back scares have highlighted just how vulnerable Canada's Arctic water infrastructure has become, especially as the North experiences the fast-tracked impacts of climate change.
What we're seeing that's a real serious impact for Iqaluit is the permafrost degradation. And so we're getting a lot of water breaks and water leaks in our distribution system.
The city is also seeing wild fluctuations in precipitation levels. In both 2018 and 2019, the city declared water emergencies because its reservoir levels became dangerously low. Last month, the federal government announced a $215 million funding promise to help Iqaluit improve its water infrastructure system for the long term. A badly needed investment residents hope will keep their water clean and safe through the warming years ahead. Heather Yerkes-West, Global News, Calgary.
Coming up, Bono in a bomb shelter. U2's surprise concert in Ukraine. Plus, a proposed new weapon against COVID-19 that's really on the nose. Welcome back. The emergence of new COVID-19 variants has been a persistent thorn in the side of vaccine manufacturers. The now dominant Omicron subvariants are better at spreading and evading protection. That's why some scientists are now turning their attention to a new preventative measure they hope will tamper transmission. Jamie Maraca reports on COVID-19 nasal sprays.
Ironed out and ready to go.
Yeah, we did some practice runs with that as well.
Dr. Marc-André Langlois and a team of scientists at the University of Ottawa are trying to take on one of COVID-19's strongest attributes, its ability to spread. Their solution? A new vaccine you spray up your nose.
The current vaccines deployed in Canada, the mRNA vaccines, are excellent at preventing severe disease. Where they are less effective is at preventing transmission.
COVID tends to enter through the nose and throat. A nasal spray could allow the body to form immunity at the mucus layer, blocking it from moving any further into the body, versus an intramuscular vaccine like the current mRNA shots, which attack the virus once it's already inside you.
What slows down evolution is stopping the number of replication events. And you can get good clearance or even sterilizing immunity when your antibodies immediately just destroy the pathogen.
We already have nasal vaccines for the flu, but they aren't without their issues. Sneezing or swallowing while being treated can impact efficacy. And with little known about mucosal immunity, development can be difficult. Michael Russell, an expert in this specialization, says producing one will go a long way towards preventing disease. No disease, no spread.
If you want to control transmission by immunological means, then I think the only way you're going to do that is with a mucosal intranasal vaccine.
Globally, there are 16 COVID nasal vaccines in human trials, including one in the initial phase at the University of Calgary. 3 others are already in large-scale human studies. If proven safe and effective, nasal vaccines could be on the market in months.
Right now, we're just working on ourselves.
Langlois and his colleagues are still in the early days of testing.
A nasal spray vaccine, an effective one, should be a vaccine that can be adapted to the various variants of concern.
Inching closer, they hope, to creating the key, experts say, to stopping COVID in its tracks. Jamie Morocker, Global News, Toronto.
Still ahead, the Philippines heads to the polls. Why its democracy could be at stake.
You're watching Global National.
The Philippines is heading to the polls Monday to choose a new president as the country's controversial populist leader, Rodrigo Duterte's 6-year term comes to a close. The leading candidate to replace him has a familiar name in the nation's political history. Ferdinand Marcos Jr. is the son of the country's late dictator, and critics say he's winning support by rewriting history. With nearly 1 million people of Filipino descent living in Canada, many here are watching with great anticipation. Dan Spector reports.
There is a palpable sense of anticipation among Canadians with roots in the Philippines as the Southeast Asian nation approaches a presidential election where it seems no less than democracy itself is at stake.
Why, Bongbong? Yeah. We need a change in our country. Unification. That's a Filipino.
This Montrealer unequivocal in her support for Ferdinand Marcos Jr., known to millions as Bong Bong, who's taken a commanding lead in the polls. His father, Ferdinand Marcos Sr., was the deeply divisive dictator and kleptocrat who cracked down on dissent, thrust the country into martial law in the 70s before his ouster and exile in the 80s. So how has a former First Family with so much political baggage prompted reactions like this? The younger Marcos has been accused of running a massive misinformation campaign to rewrite, minimize, and in some cases completely dismiss his father's record. Millions in the Philippines seem convinced, and so are people in Canada.
I know, I read about all of this stuff, but there's no proven with all those things.
This is the duster that I was wearing when they arrested me.
This former political prisoner says she was detained, tortured, and sexually assaulted by agents of the first Marcos regime. Hers just one of tens of thousands of similar stories, according to Amnesty International. The fear is that political opponents and dissenters will be treated the same way under a new Marcos regime and the past erased.
The relatives proved that they were killed, summarily executed, tortured.
Human rights lawyer Lenny Robredo is Marcos' most serious challenger, but she's being relentlessly smeared on social media and is about 20 points behind in polls.
I see Lenny Robredo giving us, I think, the principles of a good governance.
Tenny Rose Diandante is one of her biggest supporters in Montreal and got a barrage of angry messages after she held an event promoting Robredo last month.
Being pink here, being Lenny Robredo here in Montreal, you need a gut.
She sees Robredo as a hopeful step away from a corrupt regime, but if she were to defeat Marcos' information machine, it would be a huge upset. Dan Spector, Global News, Montreal.
Next, 100 years and counting. Canadian centenarians offer their secrets to a long life. Canadians are getting older. Over the past 20 years, Statistics Canada reports the number of seniors over 85 has doubled to nearly 900,000, and that number is projected to hit 2.5 million in the next 25 years. And a growing number of Canadians are also entering what was once a highly exclusive club. Mike Drolet explains.
It's a photo shoot 100 years in the making, and certainly not one Janet Hester ever thought she'd take part in.
Well, as I got to be 50, 60, 70, 80.
And you kept on going?
I kept on going, nearing 100, yes.
Centenarians used to be harder to find, but with modern medicine and healthy living, 100 has become the new 90.
It used to seem almost like this miraculous idea of living to 100. It's now the life expectancy of my own children.
Statistics Canada only started collecting data on centenarians in 2001, when there were just over 3,500 across the country. But over the next decade, that number almost doubled, and then doubled again over the past 10 years. And if you separate by gender, women are almost 5 times as likely to reach 100 than men. Why that is debatable, but the general consensus among health professionals is women have traditionally smoked less and are more active later in life.
And it doesn't need to be running a marathon, or it doesn't need to be some Herculean task that you're doing. It really just means getting up and move more.
The active part certainly applies to 102-year-old Gertie Behariel, but that's it.
I don't know how healthy. I did everything everybody else did. Smoked and drank.
All the things you weren't supposed to do.
All the things I wasn't supposed to do.
What she has, however, is a keen wit, or an active mind, a key factor in the growing number of Canadians joining the Centenarian Club.
It's still a big deal, and we make it a big deal.
And they should, because it's still a pretty exclusive one. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And happy Mother's Day to all the mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers. That is Global National for this Sunday night. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight we leave you with a surprise concert inside a subway station turned bomb shelter in Kyiv, performed by U2's Bono and The Edge.
When it's too late tonight to drag the past out into the light, did I ask too much?
Pretty cool. Around 100 people were there to watch the 2 members of the Irish rock band perform for about 40 minutes. Bono gave a shout out to Ukrainians fighting for freedom against Russia, saying they can take your lives, but they can never take your pride. Thanks for watching. Donna Friesen will be back here at the anchor desk with you tomorrow. Have a great night.